Hello everyone, welcome to Remote Lawyer. Today we are going to talk about reviewing software licensing agreements. Now, software licensing agreements are bulky agreements with lots of complex clauses. So we are going to discuss a few clauses which may seem apparently innocent, but when you look through them in detail, you may find things which are not conducive for you or your client. The first thing which we should pay attention to is what is being licensed. If you are a licensee, you need to see what is being licensed to you. Now, a software license agreement, many would say that as the nomenclature suggests, a software is being licensed. But what constitutes that software? Now, look at this clause. This clause defines a software as a company's software programs, applications, and electronic documents that the customer may download, access, or use. Now, on an apparent reading, you may think that yes, this does capture almost every aspect of a software, but does it? So the certain red flags we can find in this kind of clause are, firstly, what are these software programs and applications? Are they web software and applications? Are they mobile applications and software? What exactly are these? So for example, if I have a web application which I am licensing, I may also have a mobile counterpart for the same. Is that also being licensed, or is it only the web application? So these specificities need to be mentioned clearly. Now, the second point is associated documentation. So a software would typically come with a user manual. Now, is that manual also being licensed? Because the licensor would have the copyright over that documentation. So if someone else gets the software, would they also get the license over the documentation? That's a very important question that you need to keep in mind while reviewing software licensing agreements. Now, download or access is part of using the services. So again, you can download or access a software or an associated software, but you have to do such download and access only pursuant to your use of the services. That is the software that is being licensed to you. So therefore, you need to keep in mind these small things and these specifics while reviewing the definition of a software under a software licensing agreement. Now, the second thing is usage of the license. Now, you would typically see these terms: limited, non-exclusive, irrevocable, non-transferable, royalty-free, used right behind the grant of the license clause. So typically it says that subject to XYZ, a limited, non-exclusive, irrevocable, non-transferable, and royalty-free license is being granted to the licensee. Now, you should always read what exactly do these mean. So non-exclusive, as in they can grant the same license to someone else as well. Irrevocable, it means that they cannot cancel it. So if you are the licensor's lawyer and you see an irrevocable suffix right behind the grant of license, that's immediately should ring a bell, because that's a red flag. You are the licensor and you should have the right to revoke or cancel the license. An irrevocable license is going to be damaging to your interests. Similarly, a non-transferable license. Now, what if you are a big conglomerate who is licensing something from another licensor? It's a non-transferable license. So make sure that all your affiliates, your subsidiaries, they also have access to the license. So because it's a non-transferable license. So those things need to be kept in mind when you are reviewing a software licensing agreement. Now, who would have access to the software? Would it be certain named users, or is it an organization-wide access? Those things should be clearly mentioned in the agreement. And if it is not, then while reviewing it, you should bring that up as an issue with the licensor. Now, install and run and use the software. So for example, if usage of the license says that you are allowed to install, run and use the software, is that sufficient? On an apparent reading, you may think, yes, it is. But what about the documentation? Am I also allowed to use the documentation? And again, the term use the software is a very broad term. So should that be qualified? So those things should be kept in mind when you are reviewing a software licensing agreement. Now updates. Now typically this clause is not paid much attention to, but there are certain very critical issues that arise out of the updates clause. Now if you look at the clause mentioned here, it says company shall provide customer with timely updates, error corrections, bug fixes, modifications, additions, and or enhancements to the software at any time as required. Now, again, it seems like an innocuous clause providing updates and error corrections and changes to the licensee. But there are issues with this clause. First red flag is timely updates. Now, what do you mean by timely updates? Are there any service levels agreed to? What are the typical timelines which a licensor needs to comply with to provide timely updates? So if you see language like this mentioned, the first thing you should check is, are there any service levels? Are there any timelines or turnaround times that are being provided? If not, then agreeing to timely updates could be agreeing to a very vague and ambiguous thing. Now, second is modifications, additions, and enhancements. Now, support and maintenance is acceptable. Providing the licensee with updates is also acceptable, and so is error corrections and bug fixes. But should you be, as a licensor, should you be providing modifications, additions, and enhancements? If you have agreed to do so, then are they going to be charged separately? If not, then what would be these modifications and changes? Would they be substantial? Would they be as substantial as to create a new kind of software or a new functionality or feature? Also, who is going to own the end product of these modifications and changes? So these are the typical details that need to be kept in mind. The third red flag I saw in this clause was that the language anytime is required. Again, typically when you're providing updates, support, maintenance, error corrections, etc., there should always be a turnaround time agreed upon or mutually acceptable timelines that should be there. Also, the support team, if it's available 24/7, you should mention that clearly. Otherwise, even the timings of the support team and when they are available should be mentioned there. The most important and critical clause in a software licensing agreement typically is the software escrow clause. Now, what happens is that what if the licensor goes out of business? What if the licensor transfers its business? What if it shuts down? There are various events that may occur and that may affect the usage of the licensee's software. So the licensee is using a software and the licensor goes out of business. Who is going to provide the support, the maintenance, the updates, etc.? And typically it is for this reason that a software escrow clause is included in a software licensing agreement. Now, the licensor deposits the source code, object code, related documentation into an escrow account. The source code, object code, and the related documentation shall be released post termination of this agreement or in the event of non-renewal of the agreement. Now, again, a typical software escrow clause, but there are issues associated with it. The first and foremost thing to look out for when you are reviewing a software escrow clause are the trigger events. The trigger events are the events when the source code or the object code or the documentation would be released. And these trigger events should be very narrowly defined and not broadly defined, especially if you are from the licensor's side. The second is when you are writing that the licensor shall deposit the source code, does it mean the basic original source code or the source code at that point of time with all the updates built in? So that should also be defined when you are drafting an escrow clause. Also, this can cause intellectual property issues. So if a licensor did come up with a software and they deposited the source code in an escrow account. Now, tomorrow the licensor goes out of business and the escrow is released. Their IP is lost. So, if you are the lawyer representing the licensor, make sure that this clause is drafted very tightly, and in no event is it causing more than required damage to your client, because sometimes a licensee would be very obstinate about not having the escrow clause. So you have to arrive at a mutual ground where your party is also protected and so is the licensee. Thank you. I hope this was informative. And like a software licensing agreement is extremely complicated, complex, and sometimes looking at all the computer jargon also makes it difficult. But make sure that you know what exactly is being licensed, what is happening in the entire scenario is something that you should know about, and then go on to review the agreement. Make sure to look at each and every minute detail, because even one thing misplaced can cause you great harm. Hope this was useful to you. If you have any doubts, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, or you can connect to us via our website. The link has been given below. Thank you. Have a nice day.